the North Country Journal Hour, the radio show that gives you insights into daily life in Korea and Korea's rich history and culture. It also highlights the U.S. Army's history here in Korea, along with the other topics of interest to Area 1 soldiers, airmen, civilians, and family members. I'm Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford, and on each edition of the North Country Journal Hour, we hear from Mr. Frank Fisher, the creator of the North Country Journal radio commentaries and editor of the North Country Journal Hour, the hour that brings you a deeper look into the topics of those 2-minute commentaries that air on AFN KC The Eagle. Now here's the 2-minute commentary that today's broadcast will expand on.
This is North Country Journal with Frank Fisher.
One of the first things you probably noticed when you were new to Korea was that the signs in the airport and on highways and storefronts are written in a mysterious, no-frills alphabet that puts words together through combinations of circles and lines. That's Hangul, Korea's alphabet, invented more than 500 years ago in the 15th century at the initiative of Korea's most revered king, Sejong the Great. Unveiled in 1446, Hangul is admired to this day by language experts for being simple, efficient, and so easy to learn that even kids and foreigners can catch on quick. In King Sejong's time, the common people could speak Korean, of course, but Korea had no writing system of its own. The only Koreans who learned to write were the privileged upper class, and the language they wrote in was Chinese. All that left everyday folks with no way to write their thoughts, and that troubled the good king. So he and his scholars got working on a solution, and the brilliant result was Hangul. Sejong wrote at the time that the letters are very easy to learn, and it is my fervent hope that they improve the quality of life of all people. Over time, Hangul took root, and the ordinary people, the farm folk, craftsmen, the common people, could read and write, and in their own native language, not anyone else's. Both Koreas, North and South, commemorate the invention of Hangul with annual holidays. Hangul, Korea's widely admired, easy-to-learn native alphabet, one that for centuries now has benefited all the people of Korea, and that's helped give this dynamic country in which you live and serve one of the highest literacy rates in the world.
And that was the North Country Journal with Frank Fisher, writer-editor with the USAG Red Cloud and Area 1 Public Affairs Office.
Now for the fuller story, here's Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Sergeant Crawford. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the North Country Journal Hour. It's good to be with you again and to have this chance to tell you about what I think is the very interesting story behind Hangul, Korea's ingenious alphabet. It's something you and I, being here in Korea, can see all around us every day, of course. It's that mysterious-looking set of circles and lines, vertical and horizontal, that together make up the geometric face of Hangul. And I think that out of these next few minutes, you'll come away with new and deeper insight into this country where you're serving. And you'll hear what a huge and lasting impact Hangul has had on the people of Korea, who, by the way, have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. So let's take a closer look at how Hangul came about. The Korean people have had their own language, Korean, for many centuries. The problem was they had no alphabet, no writing system. How then, you might ask, did they communicate in writing without an alphabet? The answer is that for the vast majority of Koreans, for everyone except the elite upper class, they didn't. Koreans could speak their own language, of course, but they had no way to write it. And obviously, if there's no way to write the words you use when you talk every day, then there's no way to read the words you use when you talk every day. I said a moment ago that the upper classes were the exception, and they were, but only up to a point, because they could read and write, but the language they had to use was Chinese. After the break, we'll hear why that was such a problem for ordinary Korean people and what Korea's most respected king did to solve that problem.
Getting back into the music from their album VHS, it's the the ex-ambassadors with Renegades. We're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. We're looking today at the story behind Hangul, Korea's celebrated writing system. Before the break, I told you how, and this is going back 5 centuries and more, the overwhelming majority of Korean people, the ordinary folk, could speak Korean, but they had no way to write it, because Korea did not yet have its own alphabet. Korea's privileged upper classes got to learn Chinese, and only by using Chinese did anyone in Korea have a way of writing anything. In fact, in the Korea of those days, all official documents were written in Chinese. China through most of history has been the dominant culture in East Asia. China's influence was far-reaching, and its language was familiar to Koreans, upper-class literate Koreans, and others in Asia. That's partly because the important religious and other writings, Buddhist texts and those of Confucianism that circulated in Asia, were in Chinese. So, here in Korea, the educated upper classes spoke their native language, Korean, but also learned Chinese. And if they needed to write something down, they'd need to do it in the writing system they knew, Chinese, because, again, Korea had no alphabet. Well, upper class or not, if there's no way to write Korean, there's no way to write Korean, whether you're the richest noble or the poorest peasant. Chinese is a rich and beautiful language, but its writing system is known for being very complex. And in the Korea of centuries ago, learning Chinese could mean having to memorize many thousands of characters. Each character can be made up of numerous individual written strokes. So then and now, Chinese is a language not so easily learned. And that's where things stood by the 15th century, more than 500 years ago here in Korea. Korea, for most of its history, was ruled by kings. And in the 15th century, Korea's ruler was the gifted King Sejong. To this day, King Sejong is widely considered the most revered figure in Korean history. Well, King Sejong cared passionately about Korea and about the well-being of the people. He was also an especially talented person, very gifted. And King Sejong knew the common people of Korea could speak Korean, but that they needed an alphabet. All this troubled him, as you heard earlier, and he set out to fix it. Most historians believe King Sejong then turned to the distinguished scholars and other members of his Royal Research Institute. They were known as the Academy of Worthies, or in Korean, the Jipyeon Chun. And he told them to find a way to give the people their own writing system so that they would be able not just to say the words of their language, but read and write them too. Well, the scholars put their heads together. They worked very hard for at least 3 years, maybe longer, and what they came up with was Korea's own alphabet. They unveiled it in the year 1446. Now, for a little perspective on that date, that's just 46 years before, on the other side of the world, Columbus stepped ashore in the New World. The king's great aim was achieved. Hangul can be learned relatively quickly. Depending upon how much time one can give to learning it, you can pick it up in 1 or 2 weeks, or, well, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. It depends. And one of the Katuses in our public affairs office tells me that typically students, very young students in Korea, can learn it within a month. Hangul did not require you to learn the thousands of characters needed for Chinese. Hangul had only 28 characters, and instead of the numerous strokes one had to memorize to be able to write individual Chinese characters, Hangul, as you've heard, is written with a simple set of circles and lines, and those combinations of circles and lines form syllables. When you write down the symbols that match the sounds of a given word, you have just written that word. For example, the word kimchi, that's the spicy fermented cabbage that we all know about and that Korea is famous for. To say the word kimchi, you have to make 2 separate sounds, obviously, or syllables, kim and chi. So, to write it in Hangul, you'd take the set of lines and circles that are used to form the sound kim. The Hangul letter kiok for K, the K sound, the Hangul letter E for the E sound in kim, and the letter mium for the M sound. Put them together, kiok, E, and mium, and they spell kim. Then for the next half of the word, chi, you take the letter chiot for the CH sound, and the letter E again for the E sound. Put them together, you've got chi. Now put both together, kim and chi, and you've written the word kimchi. And anybody who knows Hangul would see that and know it spells kimchi. So there's Hangul's simplicity. It's easy to learn, it's easy to use, and it's a big part of what makes it so respected, that simplicity and ease of use. That and the immensely important transforming effect that it allowed the masses of people in Korea to become literate. Well, we'll have more about this after the break. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
Yes, and I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices. We're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Mr. Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. We're talking today about the story of Korea's ingenious alphabet known as Hangul. In the previous segment, we heard that Korea's greatest king, King Sejong, wanted to develop a writing system that would allow Korea's common people, indeed all of Korea's people, rich or poor, to have a way of writing the Korean language and, of course, of reading it. He gave that task to the distinguished scholars known as the Academy of Worthies, which was his Royal Research Institute, and after at least 3 years of work in the year 1446, they produced the alphabet that we know today as Hangul. At last, Korea had its own writing system. At the time, King Sejong said this: "Many common people have no way to express their thoughts and feelings. Out of my sympathy for their difficulties, I have created a set of 28 letters. The letters are very easy to learn, and it is my fervent hope that they improve the quality of life of all people." And here's what happened from there on. But just before I tell you that, I want to go back just for a moment to something that I was telling you about in the previous segment today, where I gave you an example of the word kimchi and how it would be spelled using the Korean letters. And I may have pronounced the word kimchi, I think I have been pronouncing it, the way most of us who are with the U.S. military pronounce it, kimchi. But actually, if I were a Korean or were wanting to pronounce it correctly, as a Korean would, I should be saying kimchi. And if you keep that in mind, you'll recognize why the letter E, which is one of the letters in the Hangul alphabet, is found in both of the syllables that make up the word kimchi. So just wanted to clarify that in case it had not been clear. I think it may not have been. Well, here's what happened in Korea after Hangul was unveiled. We'll start with the upper classes who, remember, before the invention of Hangul, were the only ones in Korea who were literate. Of course, the language they were literate in, as we've been saying, was Chinese, but because of that, they did have a way to read and write, as long as it was in Chinese. It was the masses of Korea's common people, the farmer, the blacksmith, the laborer, who, thanks to the invention of Hangul, would, for the first time in their native language, Korean, be able to learn to read and write. There was now a way to teach Korean children to read and write, and eventually books appeared for children in Hangul. As for the upper classes, they at first looked down on Hangul. They called it the vulgar script, and it was used mostly by women who, in the Korea of those days, had a very low social status. All the same, over time, the common people of Korea learned Hangul. Hangul has also been credited with helping form the close sense of national identity that Korea has become known for. It's not the only source of that bond, but it's certainly one of them. We've said that Hangul in the beginning had 28 characters, simple, very easy to use. But in the 1930s, a group of Korean scholars simplified Hangul even more. They eliminated a vowel and 3 consonants. That brought the alphabet down to its present 24 characters. Japan colonized Korea for 35 harsh years, from 1910 to 1945. In the late 1930s, during the Japanese occupation, Japan banned the use of Hangul. The Korean people, of course, chafed under Japanese rule, and the banning of Hangul was just one of many acts that deepened Korea's smoldering resentment of the occupiers. But then, to the immense relief of the Korean people, colonial rule came to an abrupt end with Japan's defeat in World War II. Every August 15th, Korea celebrates National Liberation Day. The name for the holiday in Korean is Gwangbokjeol, which means the day the light returned. Well, a name like that, the day the light returned, should give you a pretty good idea of how the Korean people felt about those 35 years of occupation. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that a few years after World War II, Koreans also declared a day to commemorate Hangul. They said that because Japan had suppressed it, it would now be celebrated with an official Hangul Day on the anniversary of its unveiling all those centuries ago, October 9th, 1446. So here in the Republic of Korea, Hangul Day is every October 9th. Both Koreas, by the way, North and South, have days that commemorate the proclamation of Hangul. And for at least the past 200 years or so, nearly all Koreans have been able to read and write. In fact, Korea for centuries has had virtually 100% literacy. And as I mentioned earlier, Korea now has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. In the year 2014, Korea opened the National Hangul Museum in the nation's capital, Seoul. The museum's purpose is to tell the story of Hangul, and its 4 stories house more than 10,000 artifacts and other items related to Hangul and its history. The museum isn't far from Yongsan Garrison, by the way. It's right next to the National Museum of Korea, and that gives you or any other visitor a chance to learn about Hangul at the museum, but also to visit the National Museum and see a great deal more about Korea's history and culture. Well, here's Sergeant Crawford with the break.
We're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thank you, Sergeant Crawford. Here on today's North Country Journal Hour, we're wrapping up our look at Korea's ingenious alphabet known as Hangul, and so time now to turn from the history of Hangul per se to something that's still related to the topic, but that you may find a little amusing, I'm not sure. And in any case, maybe it's very familiar to you if you serve here in Korea. You may sometimes hear a fellow member of our American military community refer to the act of speaking Hangul, as in this sentence, "I'm going to need one of the Katusas to get on the phone with this person because he's talking to me in Hangul." Let me quickly tell you what a Katusa is, by the way, just in case you're one of our listeners who is maybe unfamiliar with the U.S. Army in Korea. A Katusa is a South Korean Army soldier who is assigned to duty with the U.S. Army here in Korea. We have 2 very able Katusas assigned to our Area 1 Public Affairs Office, for example, Corporal Pak Sung-ho and PFC Im Gwan-ho. And so here in Korea, you might hear someone in our military say, "I need the Katusa to help with this because I don't speak Hangul." And of course, when you and I hear someone say that, we know exactly what the person means. They're using the word Hangul to mean the Korean language. But, as you've been hearing, the word Hangul actually refers not to Korea's language, but to Korea's alphabet. The word for the Korean language is actually Hangugo. And there's another one that I hear very often from Korean cab drivers. When they refer to the Korean language, they call it Hangungmal. So, Hangugo and Hangungmal, those are Korean words for the Korean language. If I were to say something like, "I need to give the phone to a Katusa because I don't speak Hangul," strictly speaking, what I'm then saying would be, "I don't speak Korean alphabet." If I say, "Do you speak Hangul?" Again, strictly speaking, it's as if I'm saying to you, "Do you speak Korean alphabet?" As I say, just about anyone who hears it will know what you actually mean. But on the other hand, you can easily avoid that problem. Instead of saying, "I don't speak Hangul," you can just say, "I don't speak Korean." Or instead of asking, "Can you speak Hangul?" you can ask, "Do you speak Korean?" Well, I hope you found today's story of Hangul to be an interesting one. As I said at the start of the hour, wherever Korean is written in Korea, on highways, road signs, in the subway, on storefronts, everywhere, you'll see those horizontal and vertical lines and circles combined to form the words of the Korean language. And as you've heard, Korean people are very proud of Hangul, proud of how easy it is to learn and use. They're proud, too, that its invention some 5 centuries ago made it possible for the great majority of ordinary Korean folk to have their own writing system. And once they had that, they could learn to read and write, and learn they did. Korea today, as I said earlier, is one of the most literate countries in the world. I've also told you Hangul was developed at the initiative of the person who Koreans regard as their greatest king, King Sejong, Sejong the Great. King Sejong is admired for many things, Hangul being only one of them. And the story of his life and his passionate devotion to his people is an inspiring one. So, sometime in the near future, we'll be devoting a separate North Country Journal Hour broadcast to telling you much more about King Sejong the Great. Meanwhile, though, thank you for joining us for this edition of the North Country Journal Hour. The North Country Journal Hour airs every other Thursday at 3 p.m. I'm Frank Fisher of the Area 1 Public Affairs Office, and I'm editor of the North Country Journal Hour. Handing back now to my North Country Journal Hour broadcast partner, AFN KCDJ, Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford. Thanks again. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
And as Mr. Fisher said, thanks for joining us for this edition of the North Country Journal Hour, and I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices.